Defund the police is coming home to roost, haunting the Democrats right before the midterm election, because everybody remembers. We had that period where many of these leftist activists started saying defund the police. Democrats fell in line and said, whatever you say, progressives. Crime started to skyrocket. Police started to retire and resign. And then all of a sudden they started to walk things back. Maybe we shouldn't defund the police. But my friends, it's too late. It is too late. The Daily Mail reports Defund the Police campaign sparked nationwide crime spree because it put people off becoming cops and left forces overstretched and burned out. Retired police chief warns. And there's more. Thousands, nearly 2,000 NYPD cops quitting before getting full pensions. And then from the Washington Free Beacon, as crime soars, Democratic voters turn on left-wing prosecutors. That is to say, defund the police is backfiring, has backfired, and will not go away anytime soon. And the Democrats are going to have to face this down. And I don't know if they're going to be able to. Murders are through the roof in many places. And across the board, George Soros, he funded many of these prosecutors. He's doubling down. In Illinois, they have the Safety Act, eliminating cash bail. And while I am in favor of actually pardoning many criminals, nonviolent drug offenders who didn't take plea deals, who didn't plead down, I should say, the policies being enacted, the blanket policies, have resulted in an escalation in crime, panic across the board, and voter revolt. Now, maybe you want to argue that it's not the Democrats' fault, it's the pandemic. Fine. Either way, it's bad news for Democrats. It doesn't need to be an indictment of them. I personally think entertaining the defund the police thing was a huge mistake. I'm in favor of reform. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm not going to advocate for completely abolishing the police in any reasonable sense. But I will advocate for, if the left in these cities want it, so be it. And they got what they wanted. And now people are starting to push back against them. Voting may not change the game all that much for, crime. Voters on the issue of crime. It may not change all that much, but it will have an impact. The economy still is the principal issue. And I think when you combine the economy with crime, gun violence, you're going to see people outright saying, you know what, I'm voting Republican. Because even Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, he shouted him out earlier this week, I believe. And here he is once again saying defund the police was a huge mistake. And he pointed out over in Sweden, the far right, they're winning because people are fed up with the violence. Who wants to live this way, man? I don't. It's one of the reasons I moved out of the big cities and into the middle of nowhere. We still have to deal with crime. Obviously, we have the swattings. But growing up in Chicago, wanting to leave all that violence, I don't want to move back into it. But I know full well what Democrat policy, what it brings. Not that I think the Republican establishment will do anything. I think they're mostly trash. We can see that reflected in voting preferences. The younger generation outright just says, no, we want to vote for somebody else. And the funny thing is, it's mostly Republicans. It's mostly moderate, libertarian, conservative-leaning young people who don't want to vote establishment. Young Democrats overwhelmingly want to support the cult in the machine. That's them. But you keep supporting this stuff. Don't be surprised when the crime comes for you. You won't be safe from the mob. And that's what they want. And that's why we're seeing it once again in Illinois, even as violent crime is skyrocketing. Even as the Young Turks are saying this is abolish the police and defund the police is a bad idea. Cenk, are you going to call out the prosecutors and the legislators who are bringing forth these no cash bail policies that's resulting in an escalation of crime? They're letting people back onto the streets. Violent criminals. It's getting bad. But you know what? They wanted to chase the defund the police. And to me, this proves they're in a cult. They could have spoken out against it. They could have said, guys, we get it. You're on the left, but we're not supporting every stupid idea. Instead, they said, we'll say anything to get your vote. Well, it's come home to roost. Let's read the news. But before we do, head over to timcast.com to become a member and help support our work. Click that join us button right there above my head on the left side. And you'll get access to exclusive segments from the Timcast IRL podcast, as well as our other shows, notably the Cast Castle vlog and Tales from the Inverted World. And you're going to be supporting our newsroom and our journalists. We just recently hired another journalist after just hiring another journalist. So we have a small newsroom, but we have a fair amount of reporters writing the news, fact-checking it, and doing our best to make sure we're giving you true and correct information. For that, we really do need your support because news is a tough business. Member supported is the way to go. Head over to timcast.com, sign up. But don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the video right now with your friends. A lot of people have been saying they're not getting notifications anymore. Midterm season is here, my friends. They don't want messages like this getting out to the people. We've seen it already. When the White House was messaging the big tech companies saying, like, why aren't you banning these people? A Fauci parody account getting targeted. Alex Berenson, a journalist, getting banned, filing a lawsuit to get his account back. The government is directly intervening. You want to help push back? Take the URL of this video, post it, and share it wherever you can. And if you're listening on the podcast, tell your friends. The Daily Mail reports the Defund the Police campaign is to blame for crime levels spiking, putting people off becoming cops and leaving forces burned out. Retired police chiefs have warned. The movement, which led to violent clashes with officers last year, brought about the dangerous ripple effects across the sector, the former top officer said. It has caused a dramatic rise in waiting time for victims of vicious crimes and caused morale to plummet to the lowest it has been in decades. It comes as crime-ridden cities such as New York, Portland, Oregon have seen staffing levels plunge in the wake of the campaign. It has created a clear path for violent thugs to run riot across the cities and left victims without justice. Yes, I agree. I also agree we have a problem with cops. I believe there is a bad culture among the police. They don't hold their own accountable. I've personally witnessed this. But that's why I think the answer is reforms, not defund and abolish. I don't mind defund in a certain sense, but you've got to be very careful about you go about demonizing the police. There's a viral video right now. It's a lady cop, and she's like, if I'm behind you, get out the effing way. Get out the way. And if you don't, I tell you this, I could be, if I'm behind you long enough, I will find a crime. I will find a reason. Yeah, that's the problem with police. I got no problem saying that. But if you think eliminating your police force is going to result in anything good, sorry, you're wrong. In Portland, hundreds of people are taking over intersections. An old man got trapped, panicked, tried driving away. They shot at him. He was safe. He was fine. I believe he was only partially injured. I don't know where he is. It's horrifying, man. I hope he's safe. I'm not sure, actually. But they ended up shooting one of their own. It is chaos and violence on the streets. Because look, man, I'm not a staunch, laissez-faire capitalist anarchist type. I do not believe that if we go full anarchist, that everyone's going to get along. I have seen the darkness in much of humanity, from the child abuse to the murders to the general psychosis, extortion, blackmail, and just anger and rage. I don't think we need a nanny state to tell us what to do. I think we just need a moderate basic agreement of some sort. And that can be a third-party arbiter of the law. It's not a perfect system, man. It's not easy. Legislating what should and shouldn't be and making sure the cops know how to do it. But I'm down to try and build a better system. I'm just not okay with this idea that we're going to burn the whole thing down, see violent crime escalate in order to win votes. For what reason? I don't know. I think the Democrats are scared of accountability because Biden's a crook and the people around him are criminals. Anyway, they're going to say retired police chief Jeff Rash told Fox News Digital that when officers are spread thin, there will be longer response times. When officers are having to work overtime, there is less time for much needed training. There's a ripple effect that right now is really dangerous. Yeah, remember that video where the guy's trying to arrest some dude and he grabs his taser and then turns to fire at him and then he shoots and kills the guy? I think he killed him. And then they said the cop was in trouble. I'm like, dude, tasers can kill. Now, the funny thing is, I also think that's true and cops should be aware of that. But it's crazy how we get these stories. Look what happens to Kyle Rittenhouse. Exactly. Quote, I talk to law enforcement leaders on a daily basis. And in today's world, their number one problem is staffing. And what you hear is the same drum being beaten. How are we going to get ourselves through this? And what steps are we going to take to get our staffing back? Halstead pointed out that the national goal for highest level priority call is to be at the scene in 5 minutes, but he doesn't believe that has to be the case today. The national goal for your highest level priority call in policing was to respond and be on location within 5 minutes. That was a national goal. It's been the national goal for decades. And the majority of major city police departments were accomplishing that goal within 3.5 to about 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Today, I don't know any of them that are aggressively meeting the national standard. Halstead later explained that some officers are not being as aggressive as they used to be because of their being indicted, their fear, I'd imagine, they're missing the word, fear of being indicted for using force. What did we learn with Chauvin? We learned that the amount of force Chauvin applied, not sitting on dude's neck for 9 minutes, but George Floyd, Chauvin, when he used the taser, he could have actually used more force. So they showed us the escalation of force chart or whatever. And based on their own policies, he was well within reason to use more force. To use a taser he didn't use. He could have used more force. He didn't. Now these cops know if they do use any force, they're going to get in trouble. This is the real world ramification. From the New York Post, nearly 2,000 NYPD cops quitting before getting full pensions. They say more ever-growing exodus figures show 2,465 police officers have filed to leave the department this year, 42% more than the 1,731 who exited at the same time last year, according to the latest pension fund stats obtained by the Post. More disturbing is the fact that the number of cops hanging up their holsters early before reaching 20 years for a full pension has skyrocketed 71% this year from the year before. NYPD Police Benevolent Association President Patrick Lynch said the so-called voluntary quits are driving the stampede, and not a big academy class that graduated in 22, as claimed last month by Chief Department Kenneth Corey. We have had retirement waves caused by large academy classes before. They were nothing like this. This exodus is the result of cops in their prime of their careers deciding they've had enough. The NYPD should stop trying to explain the staffing crisis away. Admit there's a problem and help us fix it. Yeah, I'm no fan of the NYPD. They're not the worst, but they got a lot of problems. Notably, one example is how the cops would come out and they'd look at you and go, "That's a frozen zone." And you're like, "A frozen zone?" Like, "Yep, that's a frozen zone." I'm like, "What does that mean?" It means you can't stand there. BS. You can't tell me that. I remember during Occupy Wall Street, they set up checkpoints and they were like, "Do you have a corporate ID to be here?" And I'm like, "I don't need one. You can't keep me out. That's unconstitutional." And they did it anyway. And they'd arrest you. Yeah. Not a big fan of the authoritarianism and how these things operate. We can reform the police and bring good cops on, but the demonization has resulted in good cops quitting and bad cops saying, "I don't care." That's the creepy reality. Now we got to take a turn, man. We got to push back. And Democratic voters have been turning on left-wing prosecutors. Do not tell me that when you see a story like this, Democrats facing a midterm are not panicking. Chesa Boudin, he faced a recall. Gascon, he won. He beat it. Check this out from the Free Beacon. They say late last month, Maryland voters ousted Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, who backed decarceration and defunding police even as the city's homicide rate skyrocketed. Voters are saying no right now. You think Democrats haven't taken notice? Oh boy, it's going to get brutal because the GOP is pouncing. Here we go. From the GOP, John Fetterman is out with a new ad today claiming it's false that he supports releasing 1/3 of Pennsylvania's inmates. That's news to everyone with eyes and ears, since Fetterman is literally on tape calling for that. See for yourself. Now, this is interesting. 11 times Fetterman called for releasing 1/3 of inmates. I'm going to push back on this a little bit. I do not disagree with John Fetterman for the most part. I don't know his full position, but I want to point out, I think they're playing it. I also want to point out, have you ever noticed how weird it is that John Fetterman's always covering up his neck, even when he's wearing clothes that doesn't make sense for wearing a neck gaiter? I don't know, something's weird. Dude had a stroke. He's got some weird bulge on his neck. I think if the dude's sick, he needs to tell people. This is from the GOP. Fetterman, of course, as you know, he's running for the Senate in Pennsylvania. Here we go. In total, Fetterman has advocated for releasing 1/3 of Pennsylvania inmates, 12,000 convicts, at least 11 times. In one instance, he said, 1/3 of prisoners in PA state prisons could be released and we wouldn't be any less safe. He said, we could release 1/3 of our inmates and not make anyone less safe. We absolutely must reduce our prison population by 1/3. Could release 1/3 of our inmates. We could reduce our state prisons by population by 1/3. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, hold on. I don't know the full context, but I want to hear what he has to say. Are there non-violent offenders who are in prison? Let them out. We got to be careful. Someone might be convicted of, say, like having pot. And then we're like, that's a non-violent drug offense. Let them go. And then it turns out they pleaded down from something like aggravated assault and a drug deal gone wrong, and they said plead to the possession and transport, and we'll drop the aggravated violence stuff. Maybe. So we need to have a review. In my opinion, Trump should have pardoned all of these nonviolent drug offenders after review to make sure they weren't violent offenders or had a history of violence. If John Fetterman is advocating for that, I completely agree. But I will point out politically right now, it's probably a bad idea to come out saying stuff like this because people aren't going to understand what you're saying. But I'm not going to play this game. I agree with nonviolent offenders being released, and I think it's fair to say we wouldn't be any less safe. Now, there is the question. If people are nonviolent offenders, but they contribute to black markets, which could in fact, then increase violence in other ways. I don't agree with the attacks, but I understand the politics. Right now, regular people do not want to hear Democrats double down on releasing convicts. It sucks, but it's the reality. And even if you or I might think, we should have a review and make sure we're not incarcerating people who shouldn't be incarcerated or nonviolent offenders, you got to understand the politics of it. And it's brutal and it sucks. Me, as I stated, I'm not a revolutionary. I'm a reformer. I'd love to get through this system and see some real changes. We need to stop spending so much money on this trash when we have someone like arrested for a small amount of pot. Nah, I don't care about that, dude. That's not something I think is going to make us safer. So careful what you say, Fetterman. Careful what you say. Because a third of our inmates, I don't think people are going to believe that you could release a third of our inmates and all of them would be just good people and nonviolent offenders. You are going to get black market operatives that have peripheral violence around them. You got it. I'm not going to play that game. As for the crime spree, 30 plus victims in Old Hickory neighborhood crime spree, Nashville, Tennessee. Yikes. Here's one. Obvious crime spree in Cobbs Creek ends with 2 men in custody, third person on the run. Yikes. Listen up, Lori. McDonald's CEO warns Chicago Mayor Lightfoot that soaring crime in Burger Giant's home city is leaving its corporate staff too terrified to return to its HQ. You need to do something about this. Fine. Don't do it. Don't care. Whatever. Let Republicans pounce. Let them come in and they will win across the board. Not that I think people are going to be too happy. Republican leadership is fairly garbage. But even McDonald's is coming out being like, dude, we don't want it. Sorry. Crime's a problem. Okay. Do you think Lori Lightfoot, Illinois, you think they got the message? I can tell you they didn't. From SJR.com, the end of cash bail and more. What's in Illinois' Safety Act? Oh, the Safety Act. Isn't it really funny? They call it the Safety Act. It's Safe-T Act. Oh, it's so cute. And I love this. They call it the Safety Act and it eliminates cash bail. One of its many provisions will end cash bail where a defendant is required to pay a percentage of the bail set by a judge to be released from prison, making Illinois the first state to do so. Oh boy. Okay. This means there are many circumstances where violent offenders will be released. Just let go. It doesn't mean all of them. There's still circumstances where a judge can order remand, but it means that many of these people will be released. Remember when that guy attacked Lee Zeldin and had the cat ears and was like raising his arm? I don't know if he was swinging. He was like going like this at him and they grabbed his hand. Yeah. Zeldin predicted that dude would be released right away, and he was. Bro jumped on stage with a lethal weapon. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's self-defense, it's just cat ears. And I'm like, dude, it's a weapon that could have been used going for someone's neck. And they just outright released that guy? That's a violent offender. Yeah. Well, there you go. You think Illinois will ever not vote Democrat? Maybe in 100 years. I have no idea. That's why I left the state. It is corrupt. And the people who live there are dumb as a box of rocks. Not all of them, just the ones who keep voting for this, despite the fact that crime in Chicago is insane. It's nuts. Man, the stories I could tell you. Growing up, hearing gunshots. My friend told me a story when we were teenagers. I think he told me like the next day or whatever, that he goes to take his garbage out and he sees 2 people dragging a carpet with feet hanging out of it. And he's like, huh. The next day, apparently someone found a corpse in a dumpster. Don't know if it was this person or what happened, but yeah, that's Chicago. Man, it's a brutal city. It is. You know, people don't understand too, is they hear these stories and they assume that when they go to Chicago, it's going to be just like everybody shooting at each other and it's all crazy. Dude, you'll be just fine for the most part. There's just a lot of crime. I remember talking to some people from South Africa and they were like, yeah, it's getting really bad there. And then I'm like, so you left? And they're like, yeah, but it's not as bad as people think. I can't. I actually, I don't think that's a good South African. I'd have to hear South African to get the accent right. But they were like, we've only been carjacked 5 times. And I was like, you 5 times? Yeah. So I lived in Chicago and I've never been carjacked, been shot at. But 5 times living in South Africa? Yo, that's crazy. That's the reality. People live in this stuff and they think it's normal. But for people who don't live in it, don't think it's normal, and it's getting worse, they freak out. Case in point, Sweden. I bring you now to this story from RFI.fr. Crime unites voters in Swedish far-right stronghold of, how do you pronounce this? Sjubo? It's an O with the umlaut or whatever. I don't know how to pronounce that. Sjubo. There you go. Sjubo common. Well, all right. It actually says common. There you go. I wonder if that means the same thing. Probably there's a market there. So the Swedish Democrats is what they're called. Sweden Democrats. Sorry. They're like the far right, even though they're actually to the left of many liberals here in the United States. And they're winning now. The right won a narrow majority, and it's going to bring huge change to Sweden because people are fed up with crime. Concerns over soaring crime has united voters in the small town of Sjöbo. Sjöbo? How do you pronounce it? Where far-right Sweden Democrats, the big winners in Sunday's election, posted their strongest score. I went to Sweden. It was a big story. Donald Trump came out and said, last night in Sweden, you see what's going on? And then the media was like, nothing happened last night in Sweden. What are you talking about? Because Trump meant last night on Fox News, they talked about what's going on in Sweden. Oh, Trump, you got to be more precise with your language. You know the media's coming after you. So I went to Sweden and said, let's check it out. Journalists got mad. Don't go. We went. And we found that crime was really low. But it was skyrocketing. Yeah, I think it was something like they went from 1 murder to like 13. 13 murders. I mean, it's horrifying. It's a town. It was Malmö, which is so I think the O with the thing is pronounced like so it's Sjöbo. I don't know. But in Malmö, it's really close to Copenhagen. Just like a quick train. I think it's only like half an hour or something. And maybe not even. And 300,000 people, I believe. And they were freaking out. People were terrified. We had a ride with a guy who was telling us what was going on. And then he's like, I don't want to go to this neighborhood. Rosengård. I think he was like, no, it's dangerous. And we walked around and like, I don't know. The houses were really nice. And then I thought about it and I realized what was happening. People who live in the United States deal with such levels of crime. When you see fire bombs and riots, and then you hear in this city, crime is skyrocketing by 1,000%. You go, whoa! And your worldview is built upon where you live. So you imagine your town with crime already high in the United States, and then you multiply it by a factor of 10, and you're like, man, that's crazy. You're imagining fire bombs and grenades and machine guns, and then you're like, whoa. And so people in the United States were saying, like, crime's out of control. Then you got the left being like, nothing's happening. And then I go to Sweden, and what I find? It was super chill compared to where I've been. And then I realized it, though. To somebody who heard a murder last year and went, yikes. To hear next year there's like a 1,300% increase, they're freaking out. They then go online like, you don't understand, crime is through the roof. And people equate it to their experience. So here's the reality. Crime in Sweden ain't nothing like what we got going on in the U.S., but for the people who live there, it's a dramatic increase and it's terrifying. For those that live in the U.S., when you see crime up 200% in, say, Portland, that is a shock to the system. And people say, please make it stop. It's such bad news that even the Young Turks' Cenk Uygur denounces defund the police rhetoric as wildly counterproductive. Uygur previously supported defund the police during the George Floyd riots of summer 2020. Did he really? They say you can't claim to speak for the left if polls indicate that actual human beings who are on the left don't like your ideas. He's right. And if they like your ideas, but you bungled it by making your ideas sound worse in the names and the framing, that's on you. Do better. I agree. It's funny that here's what he tweeted in June 25th. He says, I'm done. I'm now supporting defund the police 100%. I already largely agreed with the substance of the argument, and now I'm down for the framing too. There is no reform or transformation that can fix this. We have to start over and completely rebuild policing in this country. I have no problem with Cenk changing his opinion 2.5 years later. I think it's stupid to pull up a tweet from 2.5 years ago when Trump was clearly dealing with one context and then be like, haha, well, he changed his mind. I'm like, thank you, Cenk, for changing your mind. I think you're right. I think, even around then, I was saying it was nuts. There came a period where I got really upset with how the cops were enforcing lockdown. And this was in 2020. And I said, screw it, abolish them. We don't need this because they're just going to go after people who are trying to mind their own business. And then later I chilled out and was like, if the left wants it, they can have it. I don't live in those places. Fine, so be it. I still kind of feel that way, but our opinions all change. And I think it's stupid because they come to me and they're like, you once tweeted that you believed this thing. And I'm like, yeah, and what was the news that time? Like, was Cenk Uygur looking at a video of a cop like beating someone and being like, this is it, I'm done with this? Because I can respect being upset. And now he's come to his senses. He's seen the news. He's changed his opinion. I don't think there's any reason to bring up. In fact, no, there's a good reason. There's a really, really good reason to call out Cenk Uygur, call out his past support for defunding the police. And that reason is to shine praise upon him and thank him and shake his hand figuratively, because I don't think he'll hang out with any of us, and say, you were in favor of this, and now you're coming around and pushing back against it. And I think it's the right move for both Anna and Cenk. I think we should highlight this and say this shows Cenk is making the right choice and doing the right thing as someone who previously believed that. That's all we can really say. That's it. But I think it shows that even they understand it's a losing policy position. Cenk's right. Good for him, man. Check this out. Trump's MAGA army that could transform Congress in his image. More than 200 candidates he endorsed will now fight tooth and nail for him in November midterms. But establishment GOP is terrified they will scare off floating voters. Take a look at this. Trump's MAGA army. Oh, I love it. Number of Trump-endorsed candidates running for office in November. Here we go. You've got across the board. I mean, Florida, there's 12. In Ohio, there's 14. In Michigan, there's 8. In Texas, there's 19. Trump's endorsements, 90% of them won. You know what this means? It means that in Congress, the majority of Republicans will be MAGA. That means if the Republicans win, the MAGA side will dominate. That means the establishment ain't going to be able to do anything. But they also include, of course, Senate candidates, and it includes his gubernatorial endorsements as well. So there will be a strong and powerful MAGA push in Congress, and that's good news. Here we go. Maryland gubernatorial candidate Dan Cox sailed to primary victory with Trump's endorsement, though he's now widely seen as a long shot candidate in the moderate state's November race. Maybe that's the plan. The Democrats are going to try and hold their majority by demonizing MAGA. We'll see if it works. It's a bold play. The FBI going after Trump supporters is either going to terrify people into supporting Democrats, rally them into doing it, or terrify them into supporting Republicans or not voting at all. I kind of feel like running story after story about the FBI perp walking Steve Bannon is probably going to scare people. Regular people, middle of the road people, don't know what's going on. So they're hoping that seeing Steve Bannon perp walked, regular people will just say he's a criminal. But you also have independent people who do know that Bannon is what he's being accused of. They also know that Black Lives Matter has been accused as well, and nobody went after them. In this case, it looks like a Gestapo arresting political rivals. I think that's going to backfire on Democrats. I don't think it's going to play out for them the way they think it will. Crime is skyrocketing. People are upset. And instead of going after crime, they're targeting Trump supporters. That's going to rally their base. Maybe that's what they need. But I kind of think regular people are going to get scared of that. And I think that they're probably going to they're going to use the Steve Bannon perp walk video in tons of commercials to demonize all of Trump's people. But I don't know that it will work the way they think it will. Because for me, I don't like the Republican Party. I don't like it at all. I like the Libertarian Party way more. And there's a lot of things about their party I don't agree with. There is no centrist, left-leaning libertarian political party. The Libertarians tend to be right libertarian. The Conservatives are right-wing. And the Liberals are just a cult. So I'm just politically homeless. But I'd rather see the Libertarians win. I just think they ain't going to get it. I'm sorry, guys, And I'm worried that if I vote Libertarian, then I just help the Democrats. It splits the vote. So I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't have the answers. What I can say is I don't see a solution. I see the crime skyrocketing. I see Democrats' inability to do anything. I see them as just chasing after their base. And I see the best chance we have is probably MAGA Republicans. Maggie Republicans, as Joe Biden calls them. That's what he said, Maggie Republicans. Funny. Maggie. The Maggie Republicans. You got a lot of them coming in. We'll see if they win. Many of them are guaranteed to win basically because their districts are so heavily Republican, but you got to go out and vote. So I'll tell you this. If you're angry with crime, if you want to see change, what did Joe Rogan say after over the COVID lockdowns? Vote Republican. Go door to door, talk to your friends, encourage them to register to vote. And early voting is going to be starting soon. So you got to get your friends to go vote. Where mail-in voting is available and people get their ballots in the mail, hang out with them, remind them, hey, fill that ballot out. Make sure you register people to vote. It's the only way to make a difference. And you've got people that are remarkably daft, in my opinion, saying things like, voting is pointless. I love the meme where it's like, if voting could change things, they wouldn't let us do it. There are people who super chat into Timcast IRL saying, no, voting's pointless. You need to do that or do this and blah, 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 blah. Voting ain't pointless. If they had it in the bag and it was guaranteed, they would not be targeting Bannon and Trump. They wouldn't be panicking. They are panicking. They know that Trump's MAGA army is coming and they are losing their minds because they are going to lose power. There will be accountability sooner or later, and they know it. So don't sit idly by. Don't ignore this. Voting, it's working. It worked in these primaries. You need to overwhelm. Just get landslide victories. Get everybody. Like in the movie The Patriot. You know? When Mel Gibson's like, no, don't retreat. March, charge. And then they take the battlefield. That's what I'm talking about, baby. When you are winning culturally, like we're seeing across the board, Tom McDonald, Daily Wire, Emmys ratings in the gutter, CNN falling apart, MAGA Republicans winning, now's not the time to say, I can't win and retreat. Now's the time to be like, yeah, and then go and charge to the door of your neighbor, knock, and then say, have you registered to vote yet, good sir? Here's how you can do it. Go to this website. Have a nice day. That's how we win. That's how we do it. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. tonight over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.